Hello, everybody, and this is the Stacey from The Advisor. Today, I'm very excited because we have a very special guest. She is part of our podcast community. She has her own podcast on our show, and her name is Rebecca Woulfe. She is an author, and she's also a parenting coach. And today, she wants to focus on talking about temper tantrums and why children have them, how to react to them, and what's the best way to solve it so the child understands how to deal with things. And then the parents also could teach them different methods and coping mechanisms. So these temper tantrums can become more controlled and, dealt with in the best way possible. So Rebecca, this is the best topic possible because so many parents go through this and they just, it's a repetitive behavior that, consistently happens when a child doesn't get their way or they're upset. And a lot of times parents get frustrated. They don't know how to handle these temper tantrums. And, some of the ways that they deal with it may not be the best ways, or they're just looking, how do I deal with this? How do I get my child to stop taking these temper tantrums? So, I think this is, a great topic for you to expand on, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, great. Well, Stacey, thank you for having me on your show again. I'm very excited to be here and glad to be able to help parents think through what to do when their child is laying on the floor in the middle of the grocery store, kicking their feet and crying and screaming. And, I think it's something that all parents have experienced.
Yeah.
And if you're a new parent, this is something to look forward to, right? But really, the key points that I'd like to address today are one is recognizing that tantrums are normal, right? And
Yeah.
so if you are new to it or getting ready to experience the first one, know not to panic or think that there's something wrong with you as a parent or your child.
Yeah.
I think it's also important for parents to recognize that tantrums really are not about you. I think sometimes we can internalize um, that the behavior of our child and think, oh my gosh, they're doing this to embarrass me, or they're doing this to make me mad. And in fact, that's not the case at all. So remembering that tantrums are not about you. And then also, there are some things that we can do to kind of help prevent tantrums. I don't think you would get through childhood without one, but I think that there are some things that we can do to minimize tantrums. So I'm excited to talk about those topics today.
Yes, me too. I'd like to know, like a lot of times, children who have temper tantrums, a lot of times it's because they have emotions, they don't know how to deal with them. What do you do when your child begins to have these outbursts? And you might be in a store, or you might be, at an event with your family. And, it might happen at home on a frequent basis. But, how do you manage these tantrums? And also, a big question is, why do these children have temper tantrums? Because a lot of times parents think the child is misbehaving, the child is out of control, and they don't understand that maybe it's just the child not understanding how to deal with the emotions that they're going through. So maybe you could touch base of why children have temper tantrums and what parents could actually do, some of the methods they could do that are healthy methods to help their child stop having temper tantrums.
Yeah, great questions. So when we think about what you shared is absolutely correct, right? The temper tantrum is typically because children's emotions are out of control for them.
Yes.
I share in my book that some days I come home from work and I want to lay on the floor and kick my feet and cry, right? In some ways it would be a great way to release emotions, but as adults and actually as children mature into young adults, you learn how to manage your emotions. And so
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm working with parents, I use the analogy of like a water faucet, right? Like a knob
Right.
that you can turn to adjust the flow of water. And young children don't know how to even use that knob if they even had one, right? So when they get frustrated, when they get angry, perhaps when they don't get their way,
Right.
that flood of emotion is overpowering, right? And they don't have the coping mechanisms, they don't have the faucet to turn. And so it's just a flood of emotions for them. And so, what we need to do as parents is help them learn how to manage those emotions. help them learn that there is a way to, to adjust them, and other ways to express those emotions besides laying on the floor, kicking your feet and crying. And so
Right.
typically that's why our children have tantrums. It's kind of almost a natural way to release this flow of energy that is absolutely overwhelming for them. And so as we think about helping them and helping them learn that there are other ways to do that, I think that one of the most important things is that we don't add, as the expression goes, fuel to the fire. And so if a child is having a tantrum, and our first response might be to also get angry and frustrated, right? Maybe you're trying to get the shopping done, or maybe you're at home and trying to get the house in order before people come over, all kinds of things, right? Well, they're picking up on our stress, right? Which is also contributing. And so, when your child does start to go into that tantrum, you need to, as the adult, kind of pull yourself together, right? Bring yourself to a point of being calm, because what you want to do is counter those angry, frustrated emotions with calmness, right? Which can be very challenging, right? This is something that we have to learn, because our instinctual response is to match their emotions. And so we have to very consciously go, okay, I'm going to bring calmness to the situation.
Right.
And I think that when you think that through, that's also why punishment does not work in this case, right? If we punish the child, again, all we're doing is contributing to all that negative emotion. It's not going to make them stop. It's only going to escalate the tantrum. And so we have to think about other ways that we can address that tantrum and help that child learn how not to respond in that way. And so there's several things that you can do. A lot depends on the situation, right? I use the situation about, well, what if I'm somewhere where maybe we're at a wedding, or maybe we're at a graduate, we're somewhere where I don't have a lot of, I can't be loud, or I can't really talk, right? One of the best things you can do there is redirect, right? Find something for that child to do. What you're really doing is getting their mind off of that frustration onto something else. And so sometimes I would pull, and this is going to age you, I would pull a check out of my checkbook, right? Or a deposit slip and a pen, and let them scribble or color, right? Give them something to do, distract them. Sometimes you might just need to lovingly and gently pick them up and say, okay, let's go outside. Let them get that energy out. So redirecting can be a way to support them, especially in instances where you don't have a lot of resources, right? You're somewhere besides home. If you're home, right, that gives us a lot more opportunity to try some other things, right? And so what I call, let's refocus or regroup, right? Let's support the child in learning how to channel that energy in different ways. Sometimes you have to let them just cry for a little while, right? We don't want to send the message that you can't express your emotions, right? But we want to help them find better ways to do that. And so when they're laying there crying, kicking their feet or whatever, you actually, in addition to being calm, you want to be gentle. Sometimes just touching them. Our heart center is, of course, right here on the front of us, and it's also on the back of us. And so even just gently putting your hand on their heart, either on their chest or on their back, brings them back into their body a little bit, right? And it can help them relax, because that's what we're trying to do is help them kind of also get back to being centered. And so doing that gentle touch, it helps to bring them back. And then once they're a little bit calmer, find something to do with them, right? So, hey, let's take some time and let's maybe sit and read, or let's sit and play a favorite game or something, right? Get them into into a space that they associate with being calm and comforted. So that's kind of a start, right? With
Yeah.
how we can address these tantrums.
Now, you were mentioning earlier about a water faucet analogy. Now, what exactly is the water faucet analogy?
Right. So if you think about, if you're thinking about your bathtub and turning on the water, right? When
Mhm.
we turn the faucet all the way on, right, that water
Yeah.
just rushes down into the tub, right?
Right.
And that is typically how emotions hit our young children, right? It is
Mm.
a flood, in essence, if we're sticking with kind of that water analogy. It's a
Yes.
flood of emotions that hits them. What we learn as we mature is that we can turn that faucet and lower it, right? So if you and I were had a disagreement, right? And we were maybe getting angry, right?
Hmm.
We know how to adjust that faucet so that we can have an adult conversation instead of one
Yeah.
where we're potentially yelling and screaming at each other. And so, what we're trying to do is support our children in learning how to um, control that knob so that that flow of water or that flow of emotion can be more consciously managed, right?
Right.
It's what I'm asking parents to do when their child is having a tantrum, right?
Yeah.
You're going to feel that flood of emotion. You're going
Oh,
to,
yeah.
right? You might feel frustrated or angry, but you know that that is not going to serve this situation. So as an adult, it's like, okay, I have to turn off that knob, right? And make sure that
Yeah.
I come from a very calm position in dealing with this situation.
Now, what happens like when the child is completely in a very deep tantrum, and no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they're going to come back at you and they're going to start yelling and screaming. And it seems like whatever you try, no matter how you lower your voice, how calmly you talk, no matter what you say, the child is just in this very deep, temper tantrum, and you can't get them out of it, and it's like, okay, what do I do? Do we take a timeout? Do I say, well, how about maybe we separate for a little bit and then we try to talk? Or maybe the child is just too much into the temper tantrum where they can't hear anymore. They're just reacting. What do you do when the child is really into that deep temper tantrum?
Mhm. And I think that, you have to recognize that sometimes that just you have to just let it escalate. And so
Yeah.
your job as a parent is just to make sure that they stay safe. So
Right.
you could say something like, I see that you are very, very upset right now. If it's helpful, let's let you cry for a little bit, right? Um, and what's interesting too, and this has to be age appropriate. This isn't for very young. This is if they're a little bit older and can really start thinking through things. Is
Right.
when you say, you could even say, how much time do you need? Like I would use that sometimes with my children where if they were mad about something or sad, I would actually say it's okay to be sad, but how much time do you think you need to be sad? And just by introducing that idea that they can control how long they're going to be sad or how long they're going to be angry is
Yeah.
helping them to understand that we do have control over our emotions, right? I think
Yeah.
that it is a measure of our emotional intelligence that we don't feel like the outside world controls us, but that we, control ourselves. I
Yeah.
actually saw a great quote the other day that said, it isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you handle the situation, right?
Right.
Get us out of that mode of thinking um, that we're just reacting to what happens. No, we really do have control, right? We could get a flat tire and we could get really upset, or we could calmly get the tire changed. We have a
Yeah.
choice in how we address that. So when this child, back to our tantrums, when this child is in this heavy tantrum, right? Let them know it's okay. I can see that you're very upset. Let's take it, and you may have to let's take 5 more minutes and let you just really cry it out, and then we're going to find something else to do, right?
Right.
Now, there are times when parents are all, we are not perfect as adults. And for me to sit here and say, oh, just calm down, right, is easy to
Yeah.
say, but we know that that's not always easy to do. And so sometimes you also need to, take care of yourself as well. So
Right.
some of the things that you can do, right, is, and again, it depends on the age of the child, but you can say, you know what, mom's going to take a break for just a minute while you are doing this tantrum so that I can get calm, right? Talk about what you're doing and, go into the room, right? You want to be able to still hear them, but take
Yeah.
some deep breaths, help yourself get back to that point. Also, ask for help, right? If your partner's home, so that you can ask them, say, hey, I'm really at the end of my rope. Would love it if you could just come in here and help with this tantrum. Depending on ages, sometimes there's siblings where you can just say, hey, come sit with your sister for just a minute. I'm just going to go into the kitchen for a second and calm down. So, I do recognize that this is one of the most challenging things that parents have to deal with. And then, some other things you can do too when they're in the depths of that is that idea of distracting. So getting anything in front of them, a favorite stuffed animal, or it could even be a favorite drink or food item, or right, something that distracts them first from what they're doing. Because before you can address whatever the situation was, you have to
Right.
get them back into being present and get that faucet kind of turned off. So distraction can be very helpful with that particular situation.
Are there any, like you mentioned, like you would sometimes take your checkbook out and you would have them, color on a check and stuff like that. I always feel like drawing and writing therapy is so good because even for a child, they can spell the letters wrong, they can write them backwards, they can, whatever, but they're, in their head, they're expressing their emotions or they're drawing pictures, to show that they're, how they're feeling. And sometimes I think that could also help parents understand, what their child is going through. Because if you look back and in school systems too, like that, when they have draw therapy, sometimes kids will draw angry pictures or they'll draw things because that's how they're feeling inside, or a scare picture or something like that. What are your feelings about maybe incorporating, drawing into it somehow, or maybe, if they're a little bit older, maybe 5 or 6 or a little bit older, drawing, to or writing to express how they feel inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, writing, I think one of the most important thing about writing, right, is it helps us process, helps us learn actually.
Yeah,
As you know, working on your book and as I worked on my book, you learn so much just from that process. It's
yeah.
fascinating to me. So absolutely, writing, drawing. And I think what you bring up too is what are some things that you can do to actually make it so that children don't go into a tantrum, right?
Hmm.
And there's the physical basics, right? Make sure they get plenty of sleep, make sure they have healthy food, right? So if children are eating a lot of processed foods or a lot of sugar, right, we're actually kind of setting them up for a
Yeah.
tantrum, just like us, right? if
Oh,
if I
yeah.
were to go all day without eating, right, we talk about being hangry, right, the same thing happens to our children. And so really being conscious of their needs. And as parents, we know that those needs are not very consistent. Some days children need a
Yeah.
lot of sleep, other days not so much. Same with
Right.
food. And so really making sure that those physical needs are met is going to go a long way in keeping children from even getting into a tantrum, right? Because
Right.
they have the resources. But what you bring up too is kind of that emotional side, right? What are some
Hmm.
things we can do? And certainly writing, drawing, is an excellent way for children to express. And so to give an example, you can typically tell when your child is headed that way, right? Heading,
Yeah.
right. And so that's the time to say, hey, let's stop for a minute here. I can tell that you're getting upset. And again, depending on the child, and this is, this is the I don't want to say challenge, but this is the creative part of being a parent, is every
Yeah.
child is unique and needs
Right.
slightly different. So you may
Yeah.
have a child that needs that creativity, right? So
Mhm.
Play-Doh or playing in the sand or writing or drawing or any of that kind of creative blocks or, Legos, any of that type of
Yeah.
stuff is going to help that child. Let's spend some time doing something that you enjoy. And I think that's going to help you not be so angry or frustrated. And the
Yes.
other piece is for those children who are physical, right? Because not every child works with the creative piece. And so if they're physical, it's like, hey, I see you're getting upset. Why don't we go
Mm-hmm.
outside and play tag? Or let's go outside and play on the swing set. Or if they're getting really angry or frustrated, show them how they could hit a pillow, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to get that out and show them that, especially if they're getting ready to get into an argument with a sibling, or yell into that pillow, right? So
Yeah.
verbalize it and, really help them start to see how, because we can't bottle up those frustrations, right? We know
Right.
that they don't have the knob yet. And so
Yeah.
teaching them ways to express it and to get it out before they even get into that tantrum mode, is
Yes.
very, very helpful.
I notice also like you have, different generations, and now new generations are coming in and they all have their own way of parenting. And I notice like the new generation is completely different than how I grew up, how we raised our children, how my parents raised us, and how their parents raised them. And, a lot of times when I'm at gatherings and you have different age groups, they're like, I don't understand, why they don't, do this X, Y, and Z. When I grew up or when I raised my kids, we didn't let our kids do this, that's ridiculous. And then you have all these inputs, of, you pointing the finger and saying, oh, I don't think they're doing it the right way and da 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 da, but, what do you do when you're, especially in a family that's very opinionated, they're all from
Mhm.
different generations, they're all, they all have to share their opinion, even though it's not asked for. And it could put pressure on the parent, on how to raise their child, So what do you do when you feel that pressure from all the different generations in your family? Because you do have those families, a lot of them, most of them are, there's a lot, you always have those, certain ones in the family that have to have their voice known, even though they may not even know what they're talking about, but
Right. They want to be heard.
they want to be heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you handle situations like that?
Yeah. I mean, that's a challenge with thinking about raising children differently. Um, you know, uh, I made that commitment to raise my children without punishment. And I will say that, my family thought that I had lost my, lost my mind, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I know, I joke in my book that they're picturing teenagers running wild down the street, tipping over cars because they've
Yeah.
had no no discipline, right? And I
Right.
and I share with them there's lots of ways to discipline.
Hmm.
And rather than using punishment, we're going to use teaching, right? And
Yes.
so it definitely is a challenge as you try something, especially if it's radically different, right?
Right.
Um, Change brings out a lot of fear in people.
Yeah.
And I think that advice that you get comes from that place of fear, right? They love you, they love your children, and they want what's best for everybody. And so they fall back on what they know, right?
Hmm.
Because change and newness typically brings up a lot of fear. And so addressing that fear is really what parents have to do, to say, I know this approach isn't what you did. I know that you're concerned and I appreciate that concern. And this is something I have to do though. So,
Right.
right, it's just kind of staying firm in what you're
Yeah.
doing and not, you know, I talk about this a lot, right? That pushing thing. So the more that we push our children, the more they're going to push back. If we have people around us who are pushing, if we argue back with them. And so giving, recognizing what they're saying, acknowledging what they're saying, giving credit to what they're saying. I know that's how we've done that on the planet. This is how we've
Yeah.
parented for a long time. Will help them from not feeling like they have to continue to push.
Right, right. I also feel like too is that you have parents that have grown up in families where there was constant yelling, because the further you go back, the more there was discipline, where they took out the belt or they hit the hand or they pulled on the earlobe, or they got right in their face with the finger and they started getting really disciplined. And, so you have all these generations who have this, and even though they say, well, we turned out good and da 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 da, but then they talk about those moments never left their brain. So obviously
Right.
it had a negative effect on them, whether they realize it or want to admit to it. These behaviors, actually harm them in a negative way, and, so, a lot of parents too, they act out, they yell and they scream. Their child yells, they yell back, but then, as I mentioned earlier, these behaviors are learned from the environment you live in. So if a child is seeing their parents consistently yell back, or if the parent isn't handling this in a calm way, then, this is just going to cycle on. So, for parents too, I think parents have to learn to make change, as well as we work on the child and we help the child deal with their emotions in the proper way. I think parents also have to take a step back and learn how to deal with the emotions, and the situation going on, and handle it in a calm, verse manner. So this behavior doesn't consistently, snowball into the next generation.
Yeah. And that's really in my intro of what we wanted to talk about today is that piece of this is not about you. And so there's a whole section in my book about what I call triggers or hot buttons, because typically, when a child does something that we don't like, it's typically because it's triggered something in us, right?
Yeah.
It's triggered an emotional wound from when we were a child or from how we were treated by our parents. And so you bring up just a critical point to the whole idea of parenting is, our children are our best teachers. And, the example that I like to give is that you can be in a household with two parents or with the grandparents and a parent or whatever the situation is. And a child's behavior will be very triggering for one person and not at all for another. And you're like,
Yeah.
and that's very confusing for the child, right?
Yeah.
But it demonstrates how our child's behavior, and it really could be anybody's behavior, even an intimate partner, it's triggering us, right? They're holding up a mirror.
Yeah.
And, so, I'll share, one of my triggers was being valued, right? Kind of
Yeah.
having a little bit of that self-worth. And so if a child did something where I didn't feel like they valued me, right, it would be totally triggering. And I would want to lash out and say, how dare you treat me that way, right? If I were
Yeah.
to actually verbalize what I was thinking.
Right.
But when that comes up, when you hear yourself say something negative, or, in your mind where you're getting ready to say something, that's where you have to stop and say, wait a minute, what is this really about?
Yes.
Because children really don't misbehave on purpose. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we have to remember, right? They're making mistakes. They're trying to learn how to live in this world, how to live in our culture, how to live in our homes, right? In our family culture. And
Yeah.
they're going to make mistakes. And that's how you have to view them, not as it's not about you. That tantrum in the store really is not about you. It's not because they're trying, they just don't even have the cognitive function to say, oh, I think I'm going to embarrass my mom right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we bring to the situation. So you're absolutely right. Part of becoming a parent and being a compassionate, loving person is recognizing your wounds, the things that you have to work on, and the things that your trigger points.
Right. Definitely, definitely. And what are some ways that you think a person like a parent, that has a lot of trigger points that
Mhm.
tends to break out in anger a lot, and instead of, working with the child in a calm manner, they lash out too, you
Mhm.
know. Do you have any ideas of tools or methods or strategies that they can start doing themselves to kind of so they could kind of lower their faucet? And so that way they can actually communicate better with the child and help the child overcome their tantrums. And they could also learn how to deal with the hidden emotions or the things they went through in life that
Mhm.
causes them to lash out or yell consistently. And it's not helping either the child or themselves.
Yeah. I think what you brought up earlier is one of the best ways that a person can start to think that through, and that's through writing and journaling, right?
Mhm.
So, I always want to tell parents, these conversations are not meant for you to go back and go, I'm a terrible parent, right?
Yeah,
These conversations are about how can you take that next step in being, a better parent, or a
right.
parent that's going to work for your family, right? And so when you find yourself blowing up or find yourself getting angry over a child's behavior, when you're calm, right? So that night, the next day, or whatever, take some time to write about it, I think, and
Yeah,
journal about it, and what was really happening there. What was I really feeling? What was the self-talk in my head,
yeah,
right? And when you stop and think about that, then the next time when you hear that same self-talk, right, you can change that message to yourself rather
right.
than saying, this child is doing this because they don't value me. You change it to, this child is doing this because they're very frustrated because they didn't get to stay at the park an extra hour, which is what they really wanted,
Yeah,
right? It's not about me. And just continuing to work through that. In extreme cases, I would always recommend professional therapy, right? There are people out there who have the tools and the skill sets to really help people process through
yes.
some of this wounding. So that would be the other thing I would
Now,
recommend.
if you had to take today's conversation and you wanted to summarize it and give some really good turning points, what would
Mhm.
be some of the things that you suggest or emphasize to the listeners today?
Right. Well, certainly wrapping up and saying it's not about you. And I think that's probably the key point. I
Mhm.
think the second thing is teaching your children other ways to express emotions, because we don't want to
Right.
just bottle them up, right? So help them learn how to express emotions. Um, Focusing on your child's needs. I think that one of the other things that we want to try to do, in addition to kind of those basic needs and making sure that they're, not tired and hungry and or
Yeah.
sugared up or whatever, is to give them some agency. And so one of the things I like to say is try to say yes at
Yes.
least as often as you say no, right?
Hmm.
Find a way to say yes to, so if they, in the example I just gave, if they want to stay at the park another hour, well, you can't do that, but you can say, okay, I see that you want to stay a little bit longer. Why don't we stay 5 more minutes longer or 10 more minutes? Find that, give them that, okay, I feel good about myself. I got what I wanted, not everything I wanted. I didn't get the full
Yeah.
hour, but I got
Right.
another 10 minutes. People fear sometimes that if they give children power or agency, that the children will actually like turn in, overrun the house or whatever.
Yeah.
When the opposite is true, when they feel comfortable in their skin and feel like they can ask for what they want and get it, then they
Yeah.
don't have the desire to push and cry and I want this all the time. If they get things, appropriately that they want,
Yeah.
it goes a long way. So really thinking of how to support your child, know that it's not about you, and then just remembering that tantrums are normal, right? Don't let
Right.
this be a bigger deal than it is.
Right. Yes, I think that's great advice. I really do. Because this is something that people deal with all the time. And a lot of times I see parents, reacting in a negative way, which, could causes the child to react more negative. And the child sometimes, gets even more upset. And then, the problem isn't solved, and then you have, a child with built up emotions. And I'm sure those built up emotions sometimes could get really repressed and really make the child consistently burst out because it's just a pileup of emotions or, consistently building and building and building and building and building. And maybe that's where the chronic tantrums come in, because they're not understanding what's causing the child to have these outbursts, and they let it run for so long that now it's become chronic, instead of minor. And I think too, from what you're saying, I think parents also have to, a lot of parents are in denial sometimes, and they have to understand that they're human and they make mistakes and it's okay, but as long as we recognize our mistakes and we try to make them better, I think that's all that matters, because sometimes I think people, their self-worth and their ego kind of gets in the way too. And, they don't want to admit that, they've made some mistakes too.
Absolutely.
Now, you have a bunch of services that you provide, and you also have an amazing book. Can you tell us a little about the book and about the services that you provide?
Sure, absolutely. So, the title of the book is The Gift of a Punishment-Free Childhood. And I always give away the ending, and that the gift is great for the child, but it's even greater for the parent, right? When you
Mhm.
bring your child up without punishment, it makes your life so much more peaceful and calm, and it
Yeah.
really gives you the opportunity to have an amazing connection with your child. So would recommend that. It's available on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. So would encourage you to look for that. And then I also provide coaching for parents, and that's available on my website. That's Rebecca Woulfe, RebeccaWoulfe.com. So please take a few minutes to visit, and would love to have you log in and purchase the book.
I love it. I love it. This has been amazing. I thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this because this is an issue that all parents experience, with their children at some point or another. And learn how to deal with these issues, I think, are so important because, you come from different environments, you learn different behaviors. And sometimes those behaviors aren't good behaviors. And sometimes we're learning through research that a lot of things we did aren't actually really good. We
Right.
kind of, we learned as time went on. So it's really good to be open-minded, to understand, the other ways that you can actually, raise your child and and how it could actually have a more positive effect on your child and in their future. Because everything we do with our children as they grow up, can make them or break them, because if they feel trauma or if they have unsettled emotions, it's going to travel into their adulthood. So you really want to, at this stage of the game, while they're young, you really want to be able to parent them in the best way possible, where there's not a lot of trauma, anger and any kind of negative emotions, settling around the household. And that way they can learn positive behavior and even bring that in other relationships and even in working relationships as they get older. So it's actually really important to, you think, oh, temper tantrums, that's normal. But if you really think of it, it's the beginning of teaching your child how to deal with their unsettled emotions and their communication skills. So it's actually an important, a very actually important thing to do is to get them while they're young and teach them positive ways to communicate, react, express emotions, and that will go far in life in many ways, I think, too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was going to say too. The relationship your child has with you is the relationship that they'll have with people as adults, whether that's work colleagues or partners or friends, right? So
Yeah.
it has huge ramifications.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, this has been wonderful, Rebecca. I can't wait to, see what you talk about, and I know you'll be coming back on the show soon. And so I'm really excited to have you back and we can talk more about, parenting because it's such an important topic. And if we can learn the best methods possible and incorporate them into our children's, life and into our parenting skills, so many great things could happen, So thank you so much for what you do. I think it's great that that you wrote this book and that you address these issues and you help parents, learn the right way, the better way, and different skills that they can incorporate into their parenting skills that will actually benefit the child in the long run. So thank you for all you do.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you for having me on your show today. I really appreciate it. Appreciate what you do, Stacey.
Thank you. You have a great day.
All right, you too.